things that can cause death wobble or shimmy. Obviously in the video that you're watching, you're going to see the death wobble happen, and that's a pretty scary situation for most people. It's happened to all of us once or twice, but on a JK especially, what we want to check is we want to check the upper and lower ball joints. In most cases, on a JK, it's the lower ball joint that has an issue. These obviously are brand new Synergy ball joints, so we have no problem with those ball joints. The next thing on a JK is we want to check these tie rod ends. And the proper way to do it is with the vehicle on the ground, you want to have somebody steer the wheels back and forth, and you want to look for these to be moving. And when these are wore out, these will actually pop and they'll go up and down, and that's how you can kind of tell that they're bad. So in this case, we've got these two joints here. We've also got this one here at the pitman arm, this tie rod end here, and we also have one more here. And these four plus the ball joints are typically on a JK what will cause the issue with the shimmy. Some other things that can cause the issue are improper caster angle, which is your alignment of your axle here, and we want to be -5 degrees, which is the axle will be laid back 5 degrees from level. The other thing that can actually cause death wobble in some cases, but not very often, you want to check your upper control arm bushings. These happen to be Curry Johnny joint upper control arm bushings, so we know these aren't bad. But in some situations, the joint that resides here on the axle and up here on the upper control arm, those joints, when they're the rubber stock bushings, can actually cause death wobble as well. That's positive caster,
zero,
this will be
and
negative caster. And typically on a JK, we want to be negative, which is going to be leaned back, and that's going to be your axis through your two ball joints. There's an imaginary line that comes straight down through the ball joints, and then we're going to be leaned back 5 degrees.
Perfect.
Okay, also death wobble could also be caused by a loose track bar. So another thing we want to check is we want to make sure that this connection here at the lower track bar at the axle is tight, and then we also want to verify that this bushing here at the frame end of the track bar is tight. If either end of the track bar are loose, that can also cause death wobble situation. Now, not so much on a JK, but on a TJ or a Cherokee, you might also have a loose pitman arm, which can cause it as well. And on a JK, typically you're running a stock pitman arm, and these typically don't tend to come loose. And then another thing that you can check is in this situation, this steering stabilizer bracket is loose here. You can see this one moving. This will need to be attended to. A lot of people think that the steering stabilizer can cause death wobble. While it aids in death wobble, it doesn't necessarily cause death wobble. A bad steering stabilizer will generally make the front end feel a little bit looser, but in it by itself doesn't normally cause death wobble. If it's correct and it's a good steering stabilizer, it'll usually help stop it or slow it down, but it isn't going to prevent it entirely. And here's another option, like for instance, this tie rod is bent right here, and when this tie rod gets bent, it'll basically change the alignment, which is your toe in and toe out. And when this tie rod bends, it'll actually draw the wheels together, which will give you more toe in and more toe. Can cause death wobble, but typically that's not the primary cause of it.
And what about when this bends, what about the extra load it's putting on the joints?
Yeah, typically with a slight bend here, it doesn't cause a huge amount of extra here, but it can. If this is bent really bad, then it can take this joint out of spec and cause it to wear sooner rather than later. On the JK especially, with the stock ball joints and stock tie rod ends, there's no way to grease them. So typically, they don't last very long from the factory, and we find that we end up replacing them more often than not because of the fact that you can't grease them, you can't service them. So we definitely recommend a heavier duty tie rod and a heavier duty ball joint. Well, the other thing about this being bent is it could have towed your wheels in too. So
An additional factor relating to shimmy is the tire size and the weight at the tread. For example, a 37-inch tire has a heavier tread and is farther away from the center of rotation compared to a 33 or a 35. The more weight and the farther it is from the center of rotation, the greater the forces are. Vehicle speed, which means the tires are rotating at a higher RPM, also contributes to greater forces. For this reason, shimmy occurs at moderate to higher speeds, say from 25 to 65 miles an hour. It's much less likely in the dirt because the traction is lower, so there's less chance of the shimmying occurring. If shimmy occurs on the asphalt, really the only thing you can do to stop it is to come to a virtual stop, which at higher speeds can be very dangerous. While this factor probably won't cause shimmying, it can exacerbate the problem. So if there's any slop in the steering system or the suspension components, then the heavy wheel and tire combination on a tall 37-inch tire on a JK can actually cause shimmy to be much worse. Since the JKs are notorious for shimmy at some point due to wear in the rod ends and the ball joints, putting larger tires on accelerates this wear and can cause a shimmying problem. The bigger the tire, the more likely the problem is to occur. So what's the solution? One solution is to go with aftermarket high-end ball joints and steering components. For the project you see here, we used the Curry Correct Link steering system, which uses heavy-duty tie rods and drag links and joints to reduce the wear problem and eliminate the cause of shimmying. Heavy-duty ball joints also improve the situation. Another factor that can relate to shimmy is the tire balance. Sometimes regular balancing is not enough because only one side of the wheel is balanced. This can cause an imbalance laterally or dynamically, so a dynamic balancing is the way to go to reduce the shimmy problem. Dynamic balancing means that both the inside and outside of the rim are balanced, which reduces the chance for a wobble or shimmy to occur. On the Wrangler JKs, stock steering and suspension components are fine with 33-inch tires. Those components will last for some time with 35s, but the wear is accelerated on both the ball joints and the tie rod ends. The larger and heavier the tire, the more this wear accelerates and the more likely shimmying or speed wobble will occur. If you plan to go to a 4-inch lift, it's a good idea, especially if you're going to run 37-inch tires, to upgrade all the steering components, the ball joints, and the suspension components to reduce any slop or free play in the system.